Hi, this is another Ask Augustin. Today is going to be another question and answer episode. I'm going to answer more questions that I got over the last week or two. And I'll try to answer questions where I can give an answer that's reasonably short. So if it's something where I would end up talking for 15 minutes, then it, I think, needs its own video at some point. So I got a lot of questions actually about etudes and scales and what I recommend and whether I play etudes and scales. I do play scales sometimes to warm up. I think they're a great way to warm up. In general, being comfortable with scales is really important because so much of the music that we play has scales in them. And I think it's very useful for intonation practice. So there are many reasons why scales are really great. I don't do them I don't practice scales specifically on a regular basis now, but I think it's really good. Etudes. I think etudes can be super useful if you're trying to perfect a certain skill. Like this, you want to tackle I don't know, your spiccato, or you want to tackle trills or certain shifts or double stops. Can be very useful to find a piece that just has a lot of that, so you can really sink your teeth in it and figure it out once and for all. But I've always really liked trying to find places in, I'm gonna say, real repertoire in pieces I really like that have those problems. So I would rather play Paganini Caprice number 18 to practice third runs than open the Flesch scale system, because in a way it's practicing the same thing. But if I do it with Paganini Caprice number 18, then I've gotten better at scales, at third scales, but I've also done work towards learning Paganini Caprice 18. So I've kind of killed two birds with one stone. I think we have the problem, any musician who's practicing has the problem, there's only so many hours in the day, only so many hours that you can do productive work. Because of course theoretically you could play for 10 hours a day, but at some point your mind is going to be tired, your body gets tired. We have to use our time very efficiently, and sometimes I'm not such a fan of regimens that say, it has to be an hour of scales, an hour of etudes. I think you have to always see what you need at the moment. Like maybe you need an hour of etudes every day, but maybe you can also incorporate some of that work and combine it with working on pieces that have those problems that you wanna improve. I got some questions about breaks in practice time. This kind of connects to what I just said. I think it's really important to take breaks to avoid injuries, and also just to clear your mind, and it's important for psychological health. And I love taking breaks, probably too much. I would recommend that if you've been working for 45-50 minutes, maybe an hour, it's time for a little break. Put the violin away, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, or something like that, and just take a breath, and your fingers will feel better. You'll have a clearer head, and it's just a healthy thing to do. And we should all be in the habit of doing it because it will help avoid injuries later on. I had a question, when did I learn the piano? And how long did I take piano lessons for? Well, actually, piano is an instrument I didn't really have formal lessons. My father played the piano, and I had a lot of lessons on the violin. That was always my main instrument. And I started the violin when I was 5, but I started the piano when I was 7. And I always had a lot of fun playing the piano because there's such great music written for it. Basically, the piano repertoire has the greatest pieces by every composer. I think Beethoven and Brahms and Schubert, they were some of the greatest things for piano. And I love Scarlatti. And Chopin didn't really write for violin, but his piano music is incredible. Anyway, I'm crazy about piano music. So there were times when I actually maybe played even more piano than violin, because piano was kind of what I did for fun and violin was work. I don't know, that's how I thought about it back when I was 12, 13, 14 years old, that I just had a lot of fun playing the piano. I've learned a lot from playing piano, and I would recommend to all violinists to spend time on the piano, because the more piano you play, the more you start listening to music from the bottom to the top. The more you start listening to music, really hearing the whole thing, rather than only paying attention to the top voice. This is the danger, because we have a melodic instrument. The violin line is usually the top voice, and that we kind of don't pay enough attention to the bass, but music is always built from the bottom to the top, and playing a lot of piano has helped me with that, and has helped me listen while I play. So I recommend it. It's super useful. I've been occasionally getting some questions about the violin I play, and this is a really, really interesting instrument. It was made by Giuseppe Guarneri del Gesù, and was probably made in 1744. Although the label actually says 1745, but he died in 1744. So the theory is that it was the last instrument that he made, and that his wife might have finished it, or at least put the label on it, and she sold it to somebody in Riga. And then later on, like 60 years later or something like that, 70 years later, this violinist named Leduc got it. So it's called Leduc, and that's why it has this nickname. And much later it was the violin of Henrik Schering for about 30 years. It was a violin he made a lot of recordings on, and I grew up listening to a lot of recordings by Schering that were made on this violin, and it's a very recognizable, a very rich sound. It's really a wonderful instrument. It's very quirky. So a lot of Del Jesus are funny because he was so skilled at making the parts of the violin that really affect the sound, and he really didn't care about the parts that were just aesthetic. So some things are actually done like in a very sloppy way, but then the sound is incredible. So it's very different from Stradivari, who was so meticulous in every little detail so that the violins would look beautiful too. Somehow Guarneri del Gesù cared only about the sound. And so you have scrolls like this one, which is actually quite funny, like how narrow it is, and it has these ears that are kind of standing off to the side. So it has a lot of character. I also was asked what strings do I use. I use Eva Pirazzi strings for the G, D, and A string, and Pirastro Gold Wondertone for the E string in strong gauge. This is actually a setup that I started using on the Stradivari that I played before, and it seemed best to keep these strings for now also on the Del Gesù, just so that I don't change too much at once, because the violin is already so different. But I always would recommend anyone, rather than thinking of the best brand of strings, it's always the combination of the string and the instrument. And sometimes when you have like a very, very bright instrument, you can make it sound kind of rounder and warmer with certain strings. Or if you have an instrument that's very, very beautiful and sweet sounding, some strings can help project that sound and make it like a little bit more strong and robust. I was asked to say a little bit more about vibrato and actually the basic motions of vibrato, because I made a video about the shape of vibrato that I want to hear, like that I want it to sound like a vibrating voice. But what are these motions actually that we're creating? So the thing is that everybody who has a beautiful vibrato actually does it a little bit their own way. This is something you have to find your own way to do it. Give yourself enough space for the finger to vibrate. Imagine that the finger, where it touches the string, that is a firm point, but everything else is loose enough and free enough and has enough space that it can actually vibrate. Because sometimes I've seen people who are so attached to the neck that they don't really have space, really enough space to vibrate freely. So this is something that's important. Give yourself some space to vibrate. The actual motion, some people vibrate from the wrist, and other people vibrate more from the arm, or a combination of that. I used to actually do a lot of arm vibrato when I was little, like this. And then I started kind of learning more the wrist vibrato, like this. And I didn't like either one, so I started kind of combining them. So it is basically the wrist vibrating, but the arm as well. Basically, it comes from the arm, but the wrist is also loose. So that's my vibrato now. The main drawback of arm vibrato is that it can be a little bit slower, especially as you get older. It can be, there's a danger like that it could get kind of wobbly. So this is why it's a good idea to also mix wrist in, and to be comfortable with wrist vibrato. Wrist vibrato makes it harder to vibrate as wide as you want. So adding in some arm can help with that. I hope that's all helpful, and I'll see you at the next episode.